Hey biology students! In this lecture video, we're going to talk about the seedless vascular plants. Pictured on the slide, we see one of the 5 groups of plants that are classified as seedless vascular. That's right, this is a fern. Ferns are sort of the classic example of seedless vascular and will be the model organism that we will describe its life cycle in detail. So the hallmark of being seedless vascular is not only do we not have seeds, and once again, have we seen seeds yet in our discussion of plants? Well, we're on the second group of plants here. The first group of plants we described were the bryophytes. Remember, the bryophytes are non-vascular. They're also seedless, no seeds, okay? So still no seeds. Seeds have not evolved yet in our evolutionary timeline. But what has evolved? Well, the unique structure that is the hallmark of these seedless vascular plants in all plant groups will have this trait moving forward in the evolutionary timeline. The hallmark is vascular tissue. So now I want to give you a little more information about what is vascular tissue. Well, vascular tissue comes in 2 types. There are xylem vessels and there are phloem vessels. Now, for a minute, think about the fact that you have blood vessels in your body. You have arteries and veins and capillaries. So the vascular tissue of plants is analogous to that. Although plants do not have blood, they do transport nutrients and they do transport water. And they do that using 2 different types of vascular vessels. So I need you to know these 2 terms. So xylem vessels, you see here on the left. Xylem vessels move in one direction and water and mineral transport. So this is going to move from the bottom of the plant, the roots. So the roots are going to absorb the water from the soil, and then those xylem vessels are going to transport the water and the minerals up in an upwards one-way direction. On the right, we see phloem vessels. This is another type of vascular tissue. Phloem vessels, notice they move in two-way directional flow. And although it can transport water, it primarily transports food in the form of sugars made from photosynthesis. So this food, we're talking about sugars made by photosynthesis. So photosynthesis occurs in leaves of the plant, and so usually the leaves are towards the top of the plant, and then the sugars will be transported down to feed all of the other structures, as well as upwards to feed the structures that are towards the top of the plant. So recall, plants use sugars from photosynthesis to build their cell walls, to make their fruits. Okay, so let's talk about that. So cell walls. So cell walls are made out of these sugars. They use the sugars to build their fruits, and they use the sugars to perform cell respiration. So this is a very important evolutionary step in the story of the evolution of plants, because this allows plants to grow taller. This is the explanation for why plants can grow, in some cases, hundreds of feet into the air, into the sky, from their roots down in the ground. Think about some of the very tall trees that exist. How can they move the water all the way to the top of their leaves? Well, they do that using vascular tissue. And that is a remarkable thing that plants can do. Because plants don't have a pump, right? So, of course, our blood vessels move your blood all over your body, but we have this very important pump that helps with moving that liquid against the flow of gravity, don't we? What is that pump called? Yeah, it's called the heart. Plants do not have a heart, so they really rely on the sticky properties of water. Remember hydrogen bonding? So water hydrogen bonds with the sides of the vessels. In addition, it's moved by evaporative water loss that occurs at the leaves, and that creates something called negative pressure, and that allows the water to be pulled sometimes hundreds of feet in the air from the roots to the leaves through the xylem. Okay, so seedless vascular, who are they? 5 groups. So, group number 1, we call these guys the club mosses. We think they're the most ancient in the lineage of vascular plants, evolving very closely related to other mosses that were in the first group. We talked about the non-vascular plants. This group is called the spike mosses. Third group, this is called the whisk ferns. Fourth group, horsetails. Fifth group, we call these the true ferns. What are their properties? Still no seeds, just reminding you, no seeds. Their big evolutionary adaptation is vascular tissue, the transport vessels. They still are very dependent on water, just like the non-vascular plants, just like the mosses and the liverworts and the hornworts. So swimming sperm that are still going to need to swim to the egg to fertilize the egg. So they're going to be requiring water, living in damp areas. However, they're sporophyte dominant. So what does that mean? Sporophyte dominant means the sporophyte structure is the largest structure of the plant, and it's also the structure that performs photosynthesis for the plant. Now, let's revisit the general life cycle of plants. Once again, this is a very important slide. You keep seeing it, don't you? Yeah, there's a reason for that. Know this slide. Make sure you have this slide with you when you take quizzes and exams. Very important slide. But it's also a very generalized slide. So this is the story of how all plants reproduce. But remember, you need to know specifically for each of the plant groups that we're covering, what does the sporophyte and what does the gametophyte look like? And some of the unique structures that fit into this general life cycle of plants. Should we tell the story again? Okay, starting with number 1. So all plants have a multicellular haploid gametophyte structure. It makes gametes by mitotic cell division. What are gametes? Sperm cells and egg cells. What happens with those sperm cells and egg cells? They combine. We call that process fertilization. Fertilization produces a zygote, a fertilized egg. The zygote is single-celled, but it undergoes mitotic cell division to form a multicellular diploid sporophyte. The mature sporophyte produces the spores of the plant by meiotic cell division and produces haploid spores. Haploid spores are single-celled. A single spore, a single unique spore, will create the gametophyte of the plant. Got it? Okay, so now let's apply this to ferns. In your PowerPoint notes, you have this slide with the complete life cycle of the fern. This is the one you need to know for the exam. And Like last time, I am going to take it step by step. I highly recommend you fill in the blanks with me as we go through and talk about the life cycle of the fern. Let's start at the top. So remember, ferns are sporophyte dominant, meaning the sporophyte is the largest structure of the plant. So when you're looking at a fern, what do you see? Well, you see a part of the fern that we call the frond. Okay, so this is called the Fern Frond, this part here. But I also need you to know it by its term of sporophyte. Okay, so the fern frond is the sporophyte. Got it? So the fern frond is the sporophyte, diploid, multicellular diploid structure, dominant, largest, photosynthesizing for the plant, but also doing what? Sporophyte means spore-producing plant. So yeah, the fern frond would be producing the spores of the plant. So if you have a chance to ever look at fern plants in nature, take a look at the underside of their leaves. On the underside of their leaves, they have all of these little clusters of orange polka dots. Okay, so the technical term is not polka dot. What is the technical term for these orange spots? Well, let me tell you. Okay, so I'm going to circle a few of these little spots. Okay, these little clusters of orange spots. So each spot here is called a sorus. Okay, so if you have more than one, you're talking about a bunch of these little spots, we would call it the sori. So sori is plural. That's the plural. Sorus would be the singular. Okay, so a single one would be a sorus. Now in the microscope lab, we look at a sorus under the microscope. And what do you see in there? Well, what you see, if you look at a sorus under the microscope, you're going to see all these little packets, these little circles inside of a single sorus. So this is a sorus, but then you have all these little individual packets inside, and each one of these would be called a sporangium. Okay, so a fern frond is the sporophyte. The sporophyte produces spores. On the fern frond, there are collections of sporangia within each sorus. Inside of the sporangia, we would find the spores. So this is a picture of one of these sporangiums. So if we took a sporangium and we looked at that under the microscope, that's this structure in brown. So this is a sporangium. And the sporangium, all still part of the sporophyte, okay? But it's the sporangium, the cells of the sporangium that undergo the meiosis to make spores. Spores that are, of course, haploid. You knew that, right? Meiosis makes haploid cells. Then what happens? Well, the spores land and germinate into gametophyte by mitosis. So in this picture, we're seeing a single spore germinate into a young gametophyte. And then that gametophyte divides by mitosis, forming a multicellular structure. And that multicellular structure looks like a heart, doesn't it? It's green. It looks like a green heart. So I always talk about this gametophyte. This is the mature gametophyte of the fern, but it's a heart-shaped gametophyte. And it would, of course, be haploid, like the spore that it came from. And just like in the moss, there are two different parts on the gametophyte. And the gametophyte has parts that make the egg and parts that make the sperm. So down here, this at the bottom of the heart, remember it's like a heart. Let's make it look like, put a little border around it. See, it's heart-shaped. Makes it really easy to identify it. Because remember, you need to know the shapes of the different parts of the plants. So if I give you those parts on the exam, you could tell me, oh yeah, that comes from the fern, the heart-shaped gametophyte. That's right. Okay. So the heart-shaped gametophyte, this is the mature gametophyte. Now it has structures on it that make the egg cells, and it has structures on it that make the sperm cells. So we differentiate those by calling the structures that make the sperm, we call that the male gametophyte. And of course, these would be the sperm cells made by the male gametophyte, which would be haploid. And then up here, this would be the female gametophyte. Now, again, you need a microscope to see the details here. We cannot see the egg cells and we cannot see the sperm cells without a microscope. So this is the female gametophyte, which is located at the top of the heart, where the male gametophyte is at the bottom of the heart, towards the point of the heart. And then it has sort of these little root-like structures. Okay, female gametophyte, haploid. Female gametophyte makes the treasured egg. There's the egg. Egg cells inside of the female gametophyte. And just like in the moss, the sperm have to swim to the egg in water. So they're showing you the sperm cells with a little water droplet around it. So the sperm cells are swimming to the egg. They have to swim to the egg to fertilize the egg. When that egg is fertilized, we call it, dun da da, what do we call it, guys? You know this. A fertilized egg is called a zygote, and it is diploid. It's getting easier, isn't it? You've already done the moss, right? Yeah, we start you simple, we work you up, complexity. Okay, what is the zygote? What is it in? What is this little green structure around it called? That's right, it's the female gametophyte. So it's the same sort of thing. The zygote grows out of the female gametophyte. That's actually really similar to many animals. So many animals, including humans, we have internal fertilization of females in our reproductive organs, our female reproductive organs, which in animals we call the uterus. And then that uterus grows the new offspring, doesn't it? So there's a similarity there. So the zygote is growing inside of the female gametophyte, and it begins to grow by mitosis, which means it divides and makes identical cell copies and becomes multicellular. And so what we're seeing here is we're seeing this little heart-shaped gametophyte again. And remember, the sprout is going to be at the top. The new sporophyte is going to be coming out of the top because it's growing out of the female gametophyte. So this would be the young sporophyte here. Diploid. Okay. Looks like a little four-leaf clover. It's not what it is, but it looks like that. Growing out of the female gametophyte. And then eventually grows bigger and bigger until it becomes the Fern Frond. Here's what it looks like when it's in that baby stage, though. Isn't that cute? So this is what it would really look like in nature, where you see the small gametophyte structure that's much smaller eventually than the sporophyte. Once the sporophyte grows, it will be the larger structure, the Fern Frond. Okay, so that's the life cycle of the fern. Oh, do we want to highlight diploid, haploid? Sure. So we've been doing haploid in yellow. So what's haploid again? Spores, gametophytes, gametes. Gametophytes. What's diploid? That's right, sporophytes, well, zygotes, sporophytes, any part of the sporophyte, like the sporangium. Okay, very good. We'll see you in the next video.